Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm as Al said earlier. I am the EMEA CMO for Dentsu. And I've been asked to talk about building brands in the algorithmic era, what we call the algorithmic era. And I'll go into that a little bit more. But just to get us started, I just want everyone to think about one question for me, just very quickly, is how well do you really know your customer? I know that you understand what products they bought or their services. You have their product details, or sorry, their personal details. But what do you know about their values? What do you know about their preferences? Because it becomes super important when we think about how we engage tomorrow's audience, because they're engaging with brands in a completely different way now. As we saw from the presentation just now, they're engaging in ways that are really personal to them. And that makes a huge difference on how we build our brands. So I just want to start off very quickly with an experience that I went to just to bring to life that question. And just by show of hands, how many people have seen a live baseball game? Well, more than I expected, quite a lot. Considering it was an American sport, I expected less hands. But I went to my first baseball game about 10 years ago with my family. Our son at that time would have been about 7 years old. Our daughter would have been about 9. And before we went to the game, our son came up to me. His name's Leon. And he said, Daddy, I really want to get on the Jumbotron. And that's that big screen in the stadium. I was like, okay, well, if you want to do that, you're going to have to build a sign, just put one together, and then hold it up, and you might get on the screen. So he worked away with his sister and his cousin to try and put a sign together. They put a sign that said, we will smoke you," with the chant, because Justin Smoke was one of the big players at that time. So they had that ready. So they took it to the game, and he was there, and he was holding up his sign for the entire game. And partway through, he was feeling a little bit deflated because he hadn't got on the big screen yet. And he said to me, Daddy, I'm not getting on the big screen. I went, don't give up, keep going, because if you look, everybody that's been on the screen has had a sign. He was like, oh, yeah, they have. So he kept going, and eventually he got on the big screen, but the sign was so big and he was so small that he couldn't really see himself get on. So he kept trying anyway. But all the way through that, and all the way through the game, one thing you should know about Leon, he had one volume. It was on and it was off. There was nothing in between. So all the way through the game, he was trying to coach the players. So he was trying to coach the professional baseball players when he knows nothing about baseball. So he was saying things like, hit it like you mean it, put your bum into it. And the crowd was, cheering him on. It was going really well. And they were going, yeah, what he said. And they're really getting behind him. And at one point in the intermission, the cameraman was coming up our aisle. And there was a group of gentlemen in front of us. And they went, get him on. And they pointed to Leon. And like every dad, I quickly took my phone out. I had it ready on the Jumbotron for in case he went on. And the camera was getting closer and closer. And as the cameraman was getting closer, I started thinking in my head, I was like, what happens if he crumbles when he gets on camera? What do I do at that point? Do I console him? Do I nudge him and tell him to get on with it? Do I just pretend I don't know him? How do I handle that situation? So I'm starting to get nervous for him at this point. But the cameraman comes on and goes straight onto Leon. And as soon as the camera goes on him, he jumps onto his seat, he whips off his t-shirt, and he starts swinging it around his head. The whole crowd, obviously 40,000 people are up to this point. I've got my camera, and I've turned around in shock, and I've missed the record button, so I've lost the whole thing. But it was a great event. And the reason I told you that story is Leon is half me. And there was no way that I was going to be able to predict what he was going to do in that particular situation. He is my DNA. And if I can't even predict what he was going to do next, how am I going to predict what a random consumer or customer is going to do without having as much information as possible about them? Because, as we said earlier, they are buying in different ways. They're buying based on their personal beliefs. And today, consumers expect different. They're expecting more from brands, they're expecting more from their peers. And all of those things are coming together in the way that we drive an experience, how we deliver marketing. And the way that they're interacting is starting to change as well. And their behaviors are beginning to change more and more, especially since the likes of COVID and everything have come into play. Now, Gen Z are more likely to interact with your ads. They're more likely to engage with loyalty schemes that you've got running. And also, they respond better to practical content, which is an interesting one for me. By practical content, I mean things like recommendations or stock updates, simple things like that make their lives easier. And it becomes really, really interesting to think about that because it becomes a real challenge for businesses and brands as a whole, and especially CMOs, because 40% of CMOs think that their biggest challenge at the moment is identifying whether a behavior change is permanent or whether it's temporary. And that's because of the change of pace, or the pace of change, I should say, that's happening right now. But it's not the pace of change that worries me at the moment. It's actually the adoption of change. It took 10 years for Netflix to get to 100 million users. It took ChatGPT 2 months. And it's expected to catch up with Google within the next 4 years, predict on its current growth rates. If it maintains, it should catch up in that time. So it says a lot around where we are as an industry right now. And, you know, the way that Gen Z is engaging with some of these technologies and adopting these technologies makes it really interesting. Because if you think about brands, there are some brands that aren't even on social media platforms that their audiences are going to be on. And when you put over the top of that, that Gen Z is twice as likely to use AI as Gen X, it becomes even more complex, because they're starting to think about the ways they interact with brands in completely different ways. They're engaging with media, with marketing, with any individual touch point by a brand in so many different ways. And their behaviors are changing in the channels themselves. So if you look at something like Google, Google now is majority being used for navigation purposes more than information. That means that they're trying to find a destination, or consumers are trying to find a destination when they use it. ChatGPT is being used much more for informational purposes, which isn't unexpected, but it is. And especially if you think about the interface, because if you do a search within Google, if you don't get the answer you want, you do it again, you almost start from scratch, whereas ChatGPT is compound and it's much more conversational. But if you start to think about where we're heading at the moment, and you think about conversational commerce as well, it becomes really interesting, because the recent announcement between Walmart and OpenAI and their partnership becomes really a real sort of shift in dynamic, or creates a shift in dynamic, because that means that consumers can now buy Walmart products directly through ChatGPT. That means they're almost making their website redundant. I'm not saying they are, but to that extent, it's replacing that interface. It's making an invisible interface in that context, because 20% of their traffic already comes from ChatGPT, and they're making it easier for people to buy. So it does completely change the way that we need to think about how we build our brands with this audience, because it won't necessarily mean that we do it in the traditional methods that we're used to, because we need to consider now, are we marketing to humans or are we marketing to agents? And is an agent an indirect proxy for the consumer at the end, if Gen Z is engaging in different platforms? So the only thing that brands can do right now is control the controllables. So, and what I mean by that is control the things that are at your disposal to be able to amend. So things like focusing on your website and making sure that those things are under control and they're accessible to both users and to the agents themselves. Think about where your media placement is going to be, how you're spending your media, where you're spending your media, the formats of your media, but also thinking about the different opportunities to sort of land in front of your consumer. So consider, for instance, gaming, entertainment, social commerce, which will be spoken about later as well. You know, there are a number of different ways. Social influencer is another great one, because Bianca mentioned that previously. They're things that you can start to control, even though they're third parties. Just starting to control those variables up front, doing it today, makes a massive difference, because that's how you're going to be able to build the brand for tomorrow's audience. And I think it's incredibly important, because if we think about the way that brands have been built historically, it's changed a lot over the years. But I do think we're at a pivotal point in the industry right now. I think we're at a reinvention point from a marketing perspective and a media perspective, which I think is exciting. There's a Japanese philosophy called kintsugi, and it applies to people, but it's taken from an old Japanese art form. And what it is when you've got ceramic or pottery and someone breaks it, instead of throwing it away, the Japanese will fix it together. They'll piece it back together, and they will use gold dusted leaves to stitch it back together with and stick it around. And the aim of that is to celebrate the scars and the experiences that it's been through, and that applies to people as well. And the aim is, at the end of it, you have something that's more beautiful. And I think our industry is at that point. I think we can make the industry much more beautiful because of where we are today, but we have to be able to adopt the different dynamics of the industry as it is. And just very quickly. Sorry, I'm pressing all the buttons. And one of the things that I think was really insightful for me, I think, and it complements the stuff that we just saw as well, is that we asked a load of Gen Zs to put some videos together around what they thought was important with brands. And there was a lady called Emily that did this video for us, and I just wanted to share it with you, just to hear firsthand what she said.
Hi, I'm Emily and I'm 26 years old. Today, I want to talk about why I trust certain brands and how that ties into personalization. So, for me, personalized advertising can be hit or miss. I only respond to it if I already know the brand. So, recently, I saw a lamp on Pinterest that I really liked, and right after, I started seeing ads for it everywhere, but mostly from brands I didn't know or that had a bad reputation. It wasn't until I saw the same product from Otto, which is a brand I trust, that I clicked on the ad. So even though I had seen the lamp before, sometimes cheaper, I felt more comfortable with Otto because I trusted them. That made the personalization feel right. But when the ad came from an unknown brand, the same personalization made me question their reliability. When I see a personalized ad from a new brand, I need validation, whether it is from personal contacts, reviews, comments on social media. I need real people's input before I make a decision, no matter how personalized the ad is. That step cannot be replaced by AI. Human interaction is key. One of my favorite brands is Duolingo. They get Gen Z humor, are super relatable, and focus on engagement with a clear identity on social media. In my opinion, personalization only works if it matches the brand's identity. For example, if I'm shown sustainable products, but the brand is known for fast fashion somewhere else, I lose trust, and that's hard to regain. The personalization has to fit the niche I connect with. If a brand tries to appeal to everyone, they end up losing the individual.
There were two things that stood out for me when Emily was speaking. One was the Duolingo brand and the fact that it was recognizable to start with, and also the second one, relatable. The personality of the brand is what really resonated. And the second thing was trust. And trust, I think, is it's been something that's been growing within consumers a lot. I think we've heard a lot of talk about it recently, but it becomes a really important factor when we're thinking about the emotional intelligence that brands need to bring into the industry right now. And it's that combined with artificial intelligence, which I think becomes really interesting. And that's how you go in the algorithmic era. We could have made that easier to say, couldn't we? Um, and I think just thinking about how we've built trust as brands in the past, if you go back 20 years, we're in the broadcast era. Brands were, companies were really focused on brand at that point. We'd invest in brand creative, brand advertising, and we'd really focus on the mass audience. However, if you look back in the last 5 to 10 years, we've been really focused on precision and data, that short term effect of how you can drive performance through the organization. But we've noticed that that's had a bit of a long term impact with brand performance today. What we're seeing in the industry right now is that pendulum swinging all the way back to brand. And what we really need to do as an industry is stop it in the middle. It will vary by business and it'll be a spectrum, but we need to stop it somewhere in the middle. And that's what we call the algorithmic era. It's the blend of the artificial intelligence with the emotional intelligence and personal information. And because it's very easy just to flip either fully to brand or go the other way, especially with AI right now, to go to full automation. Because we know that automation does have its benefits. There's increase in productivity by up to 40%. It can increase revenue. But one of the things that we need to make sure that we're really doing is thinking about what AI is really strong at. We know that AI is strong at analysis. We know it's strong at reinvention. We know it's strong at accelerating certain aspects of programs and things like that that we're running. Things it's not so strong at is innovation, originality, creative breakthrough. And those things become really important. And we've got to ask the question is, what are we willing to sacrifice, or what is the cost that we're willing to bear as we introduce AI? There will always be trade-offs. And I'm not saying AI is really bad. I'm not saying it's really good, but we need to think about what those considerations are. So as an example, if I was to ask the question of, oh, if I was to ask the question of what if media efficiency increased, but our customer satisfaction dropped by, or customer retention dropped by 10%? Is that something that we'd be happy with? Because those questions probably aren't being asked enough within the organization right now. So those are things that we really need to think about. What are the trade-offs that we are willing to take? So we should be asking every time that we introduce AI, what is our return on AI? How does it start to drive brand? How does it start to drive growth? And there are some real benefits to it, and there are some consequences that we need to make sure that we're covering. So the way that we start to look at it is thinking about it in three stages. First one is just making sure that you've got the right infrastructure in place. That is making sure that you pull together your customer data, your behavioral data, integrating your technologies. Seems quite straightforward, but quality in means quality out. If and the exact opposite will happen as well. So we need to make sure that we've got that balance of both. Then we can start to layer, because that will be the foundations. We can layer in the automation and the artificial intelligence to think about speed, think about scale, and then we can start to accelerate the things that we need to accelerate. But that all needs to be done through the lens of emotional intelligence, making sure that it's within the parameters of human-led strategy. It's got the creativity that we've got thinking, or the creative thinking that sits behind it, but also making sure that we've got the right human governance in place as well, because that's how we're going to be able to balance the two and making sure that we're not losing brand equity as a result. And that's where we can start to apply to the principles of our channels and start thinking about the channels that I'm using. How do I build trust? What are the formats that I need to use? Also, where do I need to be tomorrow that I'm not today that's going to help me build my brand or drive growth through the organization? They're the things that become really important. So I'm going to finish off on three takeaways as well. So the first one is build relationships that matter. Know your customer as well as being known. So know your customer so that you can really understand where you need to be, what channels they need to be present at, and what's the best way to get to them. If it's a transactional relationship, you might push towards more AI. If it's an emotional relationship, you might push towards brand. Second one is set your KPIs that drive the right behaviors within your organization. It's very easy to measure the wrong things. It's very easy to measure the vanity things. So make sure you measure the things that are going to drive behaviors for your teams. And then think about your tolerance levels and the boundaries. What are you willing to accept when it comes to business performance and marketing performance? And thinking about those trade-offs again. And then the final one is build trust that has almost builds a sustainable relationship, because one mistake can be you can have big consequences in today's world. Because 32% of customers will leave a brand they love after one bad experience. So it is that quick that it can happen now. So as we're starting to think about all of this and you're building brands, think about the ways that you can build brands. It's not just the traditional ways now. You can think about different ways through algorithms to be able to do that. But as we're going through, understand the consumer and always ask yourself the one question: how well do I really know my customer?